Tēnā koutou, no mai haere mai. We'll begin with a karakia. Tū taua mai runga, tū taua mai raro, tū taua mai roto, tū taua mai waho. Kia taua te mauri tū, kia taua te mauri ora, kia tātou katoa. Tūturu whakamaua kia tina, tina. Haumi e, hui e, tai ki e.
Tai ki e.
No te kuiti ahau, kei te atatu, tamaki makaurau ahau e no whānau, kei sport waitakere, healthy families waitakere ahau, e mahi ana, ko Caitlin Macol ahau. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. No mai, haere mai ki tēnei Systems Change in Action webinar. Welcome everyone, thank you for joining us. I see we have many people from all around the motu, so welcome, welcome. It's great to see your faces. We have some awesome speakers from Murihiku, Invercargill with us today. Kia ora, Tim Fletcher and Stella O'Connor. They're from the Healthy Families Invercargill team at Active Southland, who's actually recently just had a name change from Sport Southland. So, ngā mihi, kia ora korua. And a big thanks to my team member, Priscilla Tui Samoa, who's helping out online today too. Kia ora, Priscilla. Before I do hand over to Tim and Stella, just some tikanga for this webinar. While our presenters are talking, please put any comments or questions that you have for them in the chat on Zoom. And if you're watching live on Facebook, you can also make a comment below on Facebook and we will put your partai to them at the end. If we have time and if we need to, we can also open the floor as well and you can have a chat to the speakers, unmute yourselves, but we'll just see how we go. Okay. So let's get straight into it. Stella and Tim, thank you for taking the time to share your mahi about getting people active, especially in Invercargill and particularly through active travel. I'll now hand it over to you, Stella. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Caitlin, and thank you for that lovely warm welcome. Koutou katoa, nā mai haere mai. As Caitlin said, I'm Stella O'Connor, Lead Systems Innovator for Healthy Families Invercargill, and it's my role to provide the strategic direction for the focus areas for Healthy Families New Zealand. And with me I'll have Tim Fletcher.
Kia ora katoa, I'm Tim Fletcher and I'm the Active Transport Innovator for Healthy Families Invercargill.
And what we've got here on our first slide, whānau, is just a photo of our website here, Healthy Families Invercargill. In case you want to go back and look at the things that we do, you'll see under that tab things we do is active transport. So there's some nice little success stories there to share with you. But briefly, I just thought I would start for those that are new to the Healthy Families New Zealand kaupapa, is just to give a wee brief that we're part of the Ministry of Health's wider health prevention initiative to help New Zealanders live healthy, active lives. And our approach is to work alongside our communities to create social and physical environments so that the healthy choice is an easy choice. So we work alongside our communities to think differently about the underlying root causes of poor health and to identify the changes that we can make together. And we have a focus on improving multi-health and reducing inequity for groups at increased risk of preventable chronic diseases. So this is really about a whole of community collective systems approach. Can we get a change? Hang on a minute and I'll see if I can change the slides.
There we go.
Here we go. So I've just popped up there briefly our Healthy Families Invercargill principles. I'm not going to go through those, but just to show you, because it really does define the approach, and you'll see it quite evident in some of the mahi that we're going to talk about. So the webinar today is activating active transport in Murihiku. Photo here is of our Healthy Families Invercargill manager, Jared Cappy, on the right there with Kaumatua from our Healthy Families Invercargill Strategic Leadership Group. And this is a celebration at the opening of a shared pathway that connects Oreti Beach to our city, Invercargill. And this part was actually a completed connection outside the Otatara school. That's what the celebration was for. It was to increase the safety. And the connection here is really about bringing mana whenua along our journey of activating active transport in Murihiku. So for the webinar, I'm just going to give a brief about the background and context, and I'm going to hand it over to Tim, who's going to talk about his mahi. Okay, so just going to start with a bit of a disclaimer as well. In the short time that we've actually been involved in active transport, it might seem that most of the mahi, it will appear to be focused around cycling, but want to acknowledge that cycling is just one part of active transport. So here's a bit of data for us around Southland, and you'll see that our statistics are below the New Zealand average for commuting time by active transport. That's our bar, second from the bottom there. So we're not alone here with those statistics. Other regions are a bit the same. So what's Invercargill like, the city itself? Well, our topography is pretty flat. We have wide streets, and we've got quite a good network of footpaths and some on-road cycle lanes as well. But really our street scape or a master plan is really designed for cars and cars parking and ease of travelling right outside the destination. And of course, people down here in Southland often focus on our weather environment as well, whether it's windy or rainy. So we have quite some decades of entrenched car culture, and that built environment has really been for so long created for a car-centric society, which feeds our car mentality as well. So like a lot of regions, the cycling to school has declined as well. We still have some that walk and use scooter and bus, and a number of e-bikes is increasing, but still relatively low. We do have potential though for commuter and recreation and tourism, and currently we have an Invercargill to Bluff cycleway in progress. And we've got some facilities for bike parking and storage as well. Outside of Invercargill in our Southland area, in our major towns, they've not generally been, the roads haven't generally been designed with considerations for the needs of cyclists or walkers. And really, pre-COVID, the increasing traffic volumes related to tourism and dairy industry really placed cyclists and walkers at a higher risk, particularly on those state highways and arterial roads. Okay, so back in 2019, we employed a play systems innovator, Kathy Jordan. She was really well connected with the cycling circles and knowledgeable on active transport and the local scene, and she was a board member of Cycling Southland. We really wanted to use her strengths and we also felt that active transport conversation really went hand in hand with the play system stuff that she was leading. So systems change is about advancing equity by shifting the conditions that hold a problem in place. So using this inverted triangle framework, we've started to understand the conditions of the active transport system. And she started off by mapping out a rich picture of the active transport system to really understand who are the local stakeholders, the leaders, who hold those relationships and connections, and who hold the power dynamics. What is the investment or the resource flow? What are the equity issues, the lived experiences or the mental models for people around active transport? What are the challenges, the opportunities for active transport? What do we know and what do we not know? So we know nationally, obviously, we've got the GPS statement on accessible streets. So we've got that direction nationally to increase safety and accessibility for footpaths and shared paths and cycle lanes and cycle paths to encourage active modes of transport. And locally, we didn't have an active transport strategy, but a cycling strategy had recently been developed in close consultation with the region's councils, government agencies and cycling organisations and the community. And through Kathy's insights, we knew that community engagement was really with those that are invested or travel by cycle. There was really no equity or insights from those that don't travel by active transport. But that strategy told us that Southland did have a real potential for increased cycling participation, and it looked to place appropriate governance and frameworks around those opportunities to support growth and development. And it really talked about increasing coordination is needed for sustainable and achievable outcomes. So it had been out for a few years, but there was really no clear or dedicated driver of the strategy from when the report had been done. So we felt it was a really compelling case to have a dedicated role, and we started a korero with our local councils about what they would want from a dedicated role and an opportunity to unlock resource flow. And part of that conversation has also been unlocking resource for bike education, and that was contracted out to Cycling Southland to deliver, with an emphasis on collaborating with our active transport innovator to provide this whole of community systems approach. So lots of things were happening at the same time, and Kathy was still understanding the active transport system, and she started working alongside a Colombian newcomer families, where she was gathering insights on what the challenges are for those families around biking. And she worked with welcoming communities, the Red Cross and Cycling Southland, to establish some cycling education for them. And she was also attending Pacific Island Health Social Service Wellbeing Days in an effort to also understand the Pacifica community and active transport opportunities. It was here she was hearing insights about how girls are so precious to Pacifica families. They're actually not allowed to bike, but actually have to be delivered in a car right to their destination. This is due to them not being safe in the islands to be by themselves. So starting to understand real cultural barriers to changing mindsets. Kathy also coordinated this event, the Dutch cycling documentary around that, Dutch cycling documentary, Why We Cycle. And this was followed by a lively panel discussion, which included the Dutch ambassador, Simon Kingham, who's the Chief Science Advisor for the Ministry of Transport, and our Invercargill City Council Roadie Manager, Russell Pearson. And we had about 150 people attend this screening, and we had some great discussions afterwards, and we collected insights from attendees about Invercargill, the intersections, the streets, and where people felt that they needed improvement, and really bringing the council along this journey and letting them hear firsthand these insights. And at the same time, lots happening in Invercargill. We're going through some extensive redevelopments, and the Invercargill City Council has been working alongside these developments to create more vibrant, attractive streets and create connections within the city. So Jared, our Healthy Families Invercargill manager, and myself were both invited to be part of working groups to shape the master plan for the inner city streetscapes. And this is really an opportunity for us to advocate and influence the built environment to be health promoting environments, and to include active transport, play, have a te o Māori lens, and equity when forming the master plan framework. And it was at these master plan workshops we were also asked to present data and insights that have been collected during our community engagements. So what has resulted is a city centre master plan, which is a guiding document setting out a framework for future projects. And there are 6 guiding principles, and one of them is move for prosperity and wellbeing, so balancing how we get around the city. And a budget of 20 million has been set aside to carry out projects and improvements identified in the master plan, with opportunities for active transport space to be part of that. And last year during COVID-19, the first lockdown, I invited representatives from the Invercargill City Council to a Zoom meeting to discuss the opportunity to apply for the Innovating Streets funding through Waka Kotahi, and the potential to collaborate as a working group to implement the projects. So we put on 2 applications, and our second application was successful, and that we used that to test out some of these master plan ideas. It was really about unlocking resource to test out active transport and to really start changing the mindset. So one of the key projects identified to test out was the Devon Street activated cycle route. And I've got a picture of what it looked like here. So this is really about testing improved cycling connections across the city. And we really wanted to link the city's parks and green spaces. So what we've got on the left there is a separated cycleway. And at the same time on the right, we had a non-separated cycleway down the street. So we're really fortunate down here that our councils really value active transport. And late last year, we were successful in securing a trial position, a short contract for an active transport innovator based on our Healthy Families Invercargill team. So the councils were really looking for a regional coordinated approach for active transport. In fact, the rating manager, Russell Pearson, said he wanted better governance and leadership in place. And he was really looking forward to progressing this position along with coordinated approach with our district council as well, and really committed to understanding it was good for the community and it would take a while to really change mindsets. So that's really the background to Tim's role. And I'm just going to pass it over to Tim so he can talk about some of the great mahi that he's been doing as part of his role.
Thanks, Stella. So there's quite a story before I even arrive. I don't know if I've got much to add to that, but I've got something to get us started, which is a little warm-up. And it'll become a bit more evident by the way I work, why this is in place. So I would like everyone, you can do this sitting down, to circle 1 foot from the ankle. So you just circle it round and round and round. It's easy enough to do. Okay, and then drop that for a second, and then with your index finger, just write your name in the air. So if I write Tim, and I repeat it, Tim, and repeat it again. Okay, easy enough. Now try and do both those things at the same time. So you circle your foot, and then you try and write your name in the air. Yeah, I saw some hands go up in frustration pretty quickly. It's near on impossible, and this is why this is a bad idea. So this is something that I could quite often start with groups, young or older groups, just to illustrate the fact that doing 2 things at once is near on impossible. In fact, your capability to do them drops by 50, any one of them drops by 50% as soon as you start multitasking, whether that be driving on your phone, writing on your phone, or even trying to talk to your partner while phone in the hand. So kia ora, my name's Tim. I've been in the active transport role since January this year. The role is funded through the councils, the Southland District Council and the Invercargill City Council. And from the onset, when we met together as a small group, I asked those council members and the roading teams if I could spend 1 day a week sitting in their offices. And they accepted that very quickly, and I implemented that from the beginning. And this had a lot of payoffs straight away. It allowed me to increase my incidental knowledge about transport, which I knew nothing about before I started. And it also provided me with a network, learning, getting to know other people in those council buildings. There could be facility teams, community partnership teams, the health and safety teams. And it started to give me an understanding of how councils were run and how councils run with the community. One of the major advantages as well was, was it gave me an understanding of the 6 conditions of system change and how councils fit into that. I started to understand the power dynamics and the relationships and connections that were built within council and externally. There was an understanding of resource flow and practices around policies that they had developed. It also started to give me a little bit of influence in some of these systems. Not much, but a little bit of influence because I was there and I was visible. So it's really been a great opportunity to implement this role by being active in councils and also sitting at Healthy Families. Seems like it's been a long time since I've been at councils because of the recent lockdowns and stuff. But it's great to be back in the office now with Healthy Families. So one of this relationship also went 2 ways. The other side is that council started to get information and resources from me working at Healthy Families. And a good example of this was what Stella was talking about earlier, was this shared path that was opened in outside Otatara School recently. This was a council initiative, and they created a separated shared path along a busy road, and part of it was straight past to school. Because of the connections at Healthy Families and Active Southland, I could leverage relationships with the rangatahi and tamariki teams to get into schools. And this enabled me to work with a year 1 class, and we did a lot of work, pre-work on what default future looked like, driving cars versus being active, and why that would be good for our environment. And so the kids had some basic understanding of those differences. Then there was the relationship that Healthy Families has with the local rūnaka. And as you can see in the picture here, these wonderful gentlemen came out and blessed the shared path as part of the celebration before the students rode on it, and the whole school did a haka for them as part of the celebration. This ended up being a really positive story for the council, and may not have been possible through their own communication means to be able to implement this sort of celebration. So, active transport, schools and art. Until Christmas this year, and since 2012, I've been working in a private international school in Zurich, Switzerland as a dance and theatre teacher. Before this, I was in Switzerland primarily and throughout Europe, working as a professional dancer, choreographer and performer. Dance has been part of my life ever since I can remember. I grew up doing ballet down here in Invercargill, and this theme that has run through my life is not going to just disappear because I've taken on a job working in transport. So I'm always going to be that continual advocate and user of the arts, and I'll try to fit it in whenever, wherever I can. And I'm absolutely unforgiving about that. It's vital for me to show where and how it can be implemented in all parts of life. So when I started this role, and my kids started going to started New Zealand school, it was a bit of a shock first to see the drop off and pick up scenario outside their school, and just the amount of cars. It became pretty evident immediately that it was something I wanted to address, and to work on this diabolical situation that you see at 8:30 and 3 o'clock each day. Additionally, with the Innovating Streets project that we had here in Invercargill, it was important for us to understand the voice of youth and what were their attitudes around the built environment and the roading system, and what were their desires for the future. So I started working in schools quite quickly, and I had something to offer. I could offer a workshop scenario where the kids could have an experience of theatre or dance or movement. And this is easy to sell. It's giving the school or the teachers something. So my take on these workshops changed a little bit because of age phase or directly which project I've been working on, but it generally ran to consistently across all of them. It's the same sort of thing. And very easily, just starting at the beginning, we'd stand in a circle and I'd ask the kids how they came to school that day and put it together with an action. And you immediately get a statistic of how many kids came on a scooter or a bike or walked or came on a bus, or predominantly were dropped off in vehicles. Then we would move into a warm-up activity where we're walking around the space using transport as a theme, using language around that and talking about signals. And then I'll break students into groups, into partners, into twos, and we do a little activity called Yes And. It's storytelling, it's improvised storytelling. And one student, I'd give the first line. So the first line is always, I got on my bike. So one student would say, I got on my bike. And then it was goes to their partner, and they say yes and they continue the story. To a certain point that they run out of something to say, which might be short or long, and their partner says yes and continues the story. It's a bit of imagination and fun, but it also provides insights. One of the things we get to see is some attitudes towards cycling. When I was at Southland Boys High, the students ended in an accident, most often dead, or their bike was stolen. So that was their storytelling. That's what's happened to them when they told this story to each other or created these stories together. At Southland Girls, they also ended in accidents quite often, or they were being chased on their bike. This was quite insightful, and even though we can logically say these things are unlikely to happen, it gives you this predisposed attitude or association that these students have with cycling. And I found that really interesting. So how are we going to encourage more people or more youth to use active transport if this is already their sort of default thought about that scenario? When we were investigating the innovating streets and we're trying to gauge students' attitudes towards Invercargill's built environment, one of the activities I did with students was ask them to create a typical Invercargill street with their bodies. So create a picture with your body, a frozen picture, a typical Invercargill street. 100% of the time, it was cars or an infrastructure with cars on it. So 100% had cars. And this told us that when these students or youth move into the public realm, their experience is car-centric. That's just part of their lives. When you ask them to start to redesign the streets so that it was how they would like to experience it and encourage them to think freely, you start to see different things emerge. We start to see swings and slides, water features, inclusion of nature, tunnels, areas for pets, more walking, cycle and scooting paths. It was rare to see a focus on private vehicles. Occasionally, a group would accommodate this into their focus, accommodate this into their scenario, but the focus was on appeal, attraction, interaction, and well-being, even if they couldn't articulate those words. Indeed, there was an understanding of hierarchy on the streets as well. So year 7 and 8 boys from Boys High, these are some of the students here, you can see. I asked them to create an accident with their body. So a picture again, it was an accident scenario between a cyclist and motorists. Then I asked them to rewind a few minutes and act out why that happened. So the main response as we came here was the cyclist was at fault. Or if the driver was at fault, it was kind of because they were impaired by alcohol or being distracted by a phone. So not really giving the blame to the driver fully. Something else had happened to them that it happened, or it was the cyclist's fault. When I asked the students to fix the problem, fix the scenario so that there would be no accident through infrastructure change, it was easy. They just put a barrier between the cyclists and the motorists. Kids had a really good understanding that if you wanted to keep cyclists safe, you just put a barrier in between the two of them. And they had some interesting barriers. So I worked fairly closely with one school in Invercargill around the Innovating Streets project. They are a school in the CBD, and they were 1 block away from where we put our temporary intervention, which was cycle lanes down both sides of the street that Stella was talking about earlier. So we used the school as a comparison tool. We took, I took every class in the school down to the street. We class at a time, and we did a simple observation exercise called I see, I think, I wonder, and I just adjusted it for these kids, and made it an observational tool where I said, okay, so what do you see? What do you hear? What do you think? And what do you feel? To build a picture of how they perceive that street. This is a wonderful picture from one of the students that took it a bit further and did a before and wish for, which we'll talk about a bit later. And when the responses came back, they were collated and we put them into these word clouds. And the bigger font words are obviously the ones that were more reoccurring responses. So therefore, when they saw the street, Devon Street, it's cars, it's grey, it's boring, sad, white, old, trucks, dull. So you have emotive things and very plain nouns and some describing words. But things like unsafe and accidents really start to stick out quite somewhat. One class made a little poster for me. This is a year 2 group, I believe, who said it was sad, cold, miserable, freezing, weak, and not safe. When we asked about what do you wish for, so if we're going to change the street, how would you like it? We had responses of colour, water fountain, which I found interesting. They wanted food and art and plants and play. So things I want as well, to be perfectly honest. So it was lovely to see this. And then when we made the intervention, I brought the students back down to look and went through the same exercise of what do you see, hear, think, and feel. And it was a lot more upbeat and light. And also a focus of taking them down was to understand what intervention they preferred. Well, one side of the street, the west side of the street was separated and the east side of the street still allowed for on-street car parking and was just a painted on cycle lane. The students, almost all students said that they preferred the colour side and the way it looked and with the planter boxes and plants. And they felt, or they agreed that that would be the safer side of the street to be on. There was one response that resonated with me so much from a year 4 student who I became a very big fan of, who said to me on the first time we went down, oh, this street feels like ninja assassins could jump out at any moment and kidnap you. And when we came back a few weeks later to look at the change on the street, his response was, oh, now it looks like a magical unicorn has come and done a glittering fart all over the road. Yeah, great imagination that I appreciated. So continuing this idea about art, with Southland Girls High School, I ran a small exercise, which I also think has a lot of value in showing the students what is possible. We did a soundscape where I asked the girls to get into small groups and they created the sounds of the street, what we call a soundscape. And when they came back and I got them to each go through their soundscape, it was loud honking noises, revving of engines, and car noises, and it was just loud. And then I asked them to reduce the traffic by half and then go back and redo their soundscape. When we heard these, we started to hear people chattering, the sounds of bells on bikes and birds. When we reduced it by 25% again, the traffic, we started to hear the wind in the trees. So the students started to understand what their built environment was and what it could possibly be. So that's a lot of the work I did with youth in schools. I've worked with over 400 students in the last 7 months or 8 months. And I thought it might be really something a little bit point of difference to show how I've gone about it using the processes of theatre and dance. Also with our Innovating Streets project, which this is what it was called, Te Waka Waihopai. This is the name we were given by the local iwi. I had the opportunity to engage with other parts of the community. And what I really got out of this was, how do we talk about transport? And some of you might be aware of this already, but what has really helped me is how this publication from the workshop in Lower Hutt, how to talk about urban mobility and transport shift. And when we give out the PDF of this presentation, you can see there's a link there to it. There's a webinar that accompanies this, which is also really valuable in terms of explanation. What I took out of this, like I said, was how to talk about transport. So how do we go about trying to get people invested, or even having a conversation on a level playing field? What this work from the workshop has shown us is that a lot of people will discard or not even engage with this topic if you start to approach it by talking about facts or climate change or accident rates. We have to appeal to values to be able to even engage in conversation or to capture their imagination. And overwhelmingly in New Zealand, what we value is the people around us. And the immediate people around us primarily, but then the community beyond that. So this is what they talk about trying to appeal to, and they talk about it as in selling the cake. So my wonderfully talented wife created some slides for me, some illustrations for when I went to go and talk to people about this. So when I went out and talked to people, this is an iconic roundabout feature in Invercargill. I talk about, imagine a city where you could move around freely. You could get wherever you wanted, whenever you wanted, however you wanted, no matter what state of mobility you're in, safely. You could choose whichever transport method you wanted to use. You could choose whichever route you'd like to use. Children could be autonomous in their choice of moving around, and they would be safe. When you set this scenario, it's really hard for anyone to be able to disagree with that vision. Then you put in, so unfortunately, we've been sold a lie. We've been sold this by car manufacturers and petrol companies, oil companies, that the best way for us to move around is in cars or private vehicles, and then start to explain a little bit more the health impact of that and the mental well-being impact of that as well. And if you want, there's some great publications by Whānau Tahi around the impact of mental well-being and social impact of our transport systems to sort of illustrate this fact a bit more. So I've really found that such a powerful way of starting conversation, like I said. Another thing that I've found that has worked as a good tool, especially with older people, is talking about the economy of space. The picture you have here is the Invercargill CBD. It's a little bit old. That left-hand block has been flattened, and we're building a lovely new mall on it at the moment. But it serves a purpose for this exercise. I'll show this picture, and I'd say we talk about just the space that private vehicles require. So this is the live lanes that traffic needs. This is our off-street parking. Oh, sorry, on-street parking, apologize. And then this is our off-street parking. And then when you do it in one color, you have something like this. And I don't know if I've even got it all covered. This is what I know. And that's 40%, just on 40% of the surface area. And if you're talking to people that are economically or business minded, this is prime real estate in the middle of your city. And it's being used just for cars, for moving around, or parking predominantly. So this sort of thing resonated. The other interesting thing about going through this process, both talking about the transport system, our car-centric society, and our devotion to giving them space, is an insight which I think could have some more investigation into it, or some research, would be how our baby boomers react to this. I had the impression that there was a sort of underlying sense of guilt that this happened on their watch, and maybe there's some value in investigating that a little bit further. So that was my urban context. This is my rural context, which is, to say, a little bit different. That is a massive, massive piece of land and water. This is the Southland District Council, their region and their network. And it's really different to the urban context. And I have to really take off my hat to the roading team in the Southland District Council that they've undertaken responsibility for active transport as part of their vision, and they're moving ahead. Because if you think about it in a logical sense, it's one that they could have dipped out of fairly easily. This network is vital to the economy of the region. And it's been a process of just investigation, asking questions and talking. And there's a real openness to try and just understand how in any way could we move forward. There's been some opportunities. I've done a bit of work in Te Anau and Winton and Ototo, engaging with locals and youth to understand perception and desires about what they want for their areas. Te Anau is really at a point of opportunity. It's a township that has really suffered heavily under COVID-19, and we saw that as maybe an opportunity to create some change, and we are slowly getting a little bit of traction in that area. But these rural areas are very different, of course. And what we're beginning to understand is maybe it's around recreational facilities and in the active sense, and that maybe these make a network of destinations. It's, of course, a different ball game. And when I was talking with some youth in Ototo recently, talking to 11 and 12-year-old boys and asking them what they would like in their region, and they said that they would like a motorbike track. And I said, oh, that's wonderful, but it's going to be hard for me to endorse that. And they're like, why not? Because you're not legally allowed to ride your motorcycle. So their way of life is very different to what happens in urban centres, and that's got to be acknowledged and catered for where possible. So that's the Southland District. The one great thing that I've been able to do, and I love about the Healthy Families approach, is this experimentation. There's a certain amount of freedom to be able to try new things. And some of the things I've been working on that haven't come, or sort of at the beginning, or haven't come to fruition yet, is one of the things I like thinking about is working in a paradox. So early on, I set myself this question: how can we encourage car use to get more people on bikes? Invercargill people love their cars, and it seems like contradictory, or it's meant to be contradictory. And I sort of tackled this question for a while, and I came up with this scheme that I call peddling for petrol. And even though I haven't been able to implement it with a business yet, if anybody out there wants to take it on, please go for it. I'd love to see how you go. The idea is to get a business on board where they would pay 50 cents per kilometre for bike use. So every kilometre that an employee cycles, they get 50 cents towards a petrol voucher, which is given at the end of the month. The IRD says that you should calculate 81 cents a kilometre for car use if you're a business. So by economic means, this means it's actually a cheaper way, and that we would have more people using cycles rather than cars. As of yet, I aim to find a business to take this on. We're looking at a free bike scheme at the local tertiary institution, the Southern Institute of Technology. There's definitely appetite for it. We just need to find the right partners to get moving. And working on a community bike workshop is also something I'd love to see for Invercargill. So those are some of the things I've been experimenting along the way. The funding for this role has been coming. The funding was the funding was till June originally, and has now been extended for this active transport role. And for the councils, I wrote a report about where I saw the focus for the role should be as it moves forward. Sorry. And these are the areas that were identified for the active transport in the region, which is the Southland district, as just a continuing focus on gathering insights and building a guidance document for rural communities, creating a culture, which is a bit of that peddling for petrol, and also looking at maybe, we talked about bike pumps in cafes. If Invercargill became a city where it was known that every cafe had a bike pump in it. High deprivation is an area of focus that's a focus of healthy families anyway, but is also clearly identified in Waka Kotahi's literature. The schools and education, forming active transport plans for local schools. I'm working with middle school at the moment and implementing one. The Ride Southland strategy that Stella was talking about early, so activating leadership and implementing that, but it might need to have more of a holistic focus on active transport and working with Māori in the region. So that is basically my 7 or 8 months in the role of active transport in a nutshell. And I think we may even have time for a few quick questions. I don't know if we've got any answers, but we definitely might have some questions.
And we did want to leave you with a bit of a call to action, to think bigger,
Yes.
activate leadership, and to drive innovation. And as you can see, Tim's really taken on that approach, and it's worked really well down here.
I think I want to say my biggest learning out of the whole thing was that systems work is really complicated and it takes time. Take the small wins when you can, but keep your focus on the big picture. I think that's been my biggest takeaway so far.
Oh, kia ora, Tim and Stella. That was actually going to be my question for you, Tim. What is your biggest learnings? But Stella, thank you for painting a picture for us on what the active transport system looks like in Invercargill, and your really close working partnership with both of your councils. It's awesome. And Tim, it's awesome to hear your passion for dance and your skills in the arts and how you've weaved that into your role. It's been beautiful, actually. But also how you gathered the voice of children and how you listened to that and was part of listening to it, and they could see what they put forward right in front of them. So that was awesome. Thank you for sharing.
Welcome.
And you talked about how when you went into schools, you had something to offer, which is, awesome. And then what else do you think, when you think about working with schools or with children, what else do you think was kind of a success factor in working with them? You had something to bring to the table, but what else do you think made it successful working with them?
It's multifaceted, I think. It's multifaceted on a personal level, but like working with kids is always has a level of success. Even if you walk out feeling like it's a complete failure, you've learned something, and you've had a sharing with younger people. It was also an opportunity for the councils to have this unheard voice to be fed back to them. It's not something I'm aware that they actively do. And I was doing that both in the rural context and the urban context. So there was a direct line of or collection of attitudes, which is really heard. These are not people that submit on long-term plans, but they are people that are going to inherit this environment that they're living in. So I think that's probably one of the biggest success things, or I hope will eventuate into a success.
Yeah, awesome. And you make a good point that these aren't the people who write submissions to long-term plans. You're right there. And I mean, your role, it's really unique. Is there anyone else around the motu who has a similar role to you, who you've connected with? Or
there's plenty of enthusiastic people.
Yeah.
But what's been really good for me is the Healthy Families Network throughout the country. Very quickly, my manager Jared sent out an email when I came on board to Healthy Families New Zealand, and I got replies straight away from Waitakere and Lower Hutt, and Nish at that time, and Piri and Lower Hutt. We came together as a group and used each other's sounding boards and talked about projects each other are doing, which was really rich and supportive. Sorry, Stella's just written me a note and I'm not quite sure what she means.
So although those, they might not be directly active transport innovators, they're working very much to change the built environment and the mahi that they're doing.
Down here
around the country.
Around the country.
Yeah, kia ora. We do have a little bit of time, so I welcome anyone. If you have any comments or questions, you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask Stella and Tim some questions. Wait a few minutes to see if anyone wants to ask any questions.
Well, Tim can do another exercise with her hands.
Kia ora, Tim and Stella, thank you very much. If I can just jump in though, Simon Vincent, Tene from Auckland Transport. Really great to hear all you're doing down there in Southland. Very great to see your enthusiasm. Just one of the general comments I'd make, and I think you've put it across really well, is but your interest, if you like, in art and dance, and I know Caitlin mentioned it, I think is really important, that we don't get pigeonholed. So it's not always just someone who's a transport person talking about transport, or it's just a sport person talking about these things. I think whatever anyone can bring to the table is really useful, and I think you know, you've really shown how you can engage with different age groups through that as well, which is really good. But just very quickly, I'll send you a quick email, Tim, because some of your ideas, we've got some. We're very fortunate up here in Waitakere. We have the Eco Matters bike hubs who do recycling bikes to people of need in the community, and we've looked at doing things like a bike pump library, so people can get things out as well. So we've got some good things that I'm sure we can share with you as well. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you, Simon. That would be awesome to hear some of that. Yeah.
Kia ora, Simon. Certainly tautoko that. Simon, his email's actually just on the screen. Kia ora, Richard. Would you like to unmute yourself?
Yep, kia ora. Tēnā katoa. Ko Richard Watman taku anoa. I work in Te Tuapapakua Kāinga, which is HUD, so Housing and Urban Development. And I'm really interested in how you manage the governance between the various government, central and local stakeholders.
Can you be a little bit more specific about that, Richard?
Well, the commissioning of the work that you did, and then the accounting of it to whoever commissioned it, and the relationship then that you had with others. So you mentioned going and sitting in the offices as a really good way of understanding, I guess it was understanding them, but also getting them familiar with you. So,
yes.
But was there anything more formal, and how did that work, and was it fit for purpose?
No, there isn't anything more formal than that currently. There might be, now that the role has solidified somewhat as we move forward, those things might be put into place as in terms of a work plan or more of a structure around it. Those things are up for negotiation and discussion at the moment. But I think one of the great things was it was really a phase of experimentation, and all the parties were a little bit, for lack of a better word, naive about what we were entering into, or innocent, in a really innocent way. And that allowed for a lot of just casting the net out and having a go at things and trying to find out what was the lay of the land. So some of those formal structures might now be appropriate to put into place.
And I'll just jump in there as well, Richard. So prior to Tim coming on board, we really worked alongside the councils with what they wanted to see from this dedicated role, and we did sort of draft out a work plan together. And at that time, we said we wanted this person to actually be sitting in both councils at least one day a week of each council, so that there are no barriers. They can get to know who's who in the zoo and who does what, and there's a direct line. And then I believe that the funding might be through in Waka Kotahi funding that they were able to use for this. And we also said that we would provide a report back to that work plan that we discussed prior to Tim coming on board. Yeah, but from their point of view, they really wanted to have a coordinated regional approach with leading active transport. And they wanted to show that the councils were doing this. So at all opportunities, we would say that, you know, as part of Tim's role, he's funded by council. This is work he's doing for council. And for sometimes, I think it was actually useful for council to be able to say, we have this NGO on board, and so it's not actually council coming in and telling people to do this as well. So it was a really, really good relationship.
Awesome. Thanks, Stella and Tim. And Richard, thanks for joining us and for your question. Tiffany, we have 2 more minutes, quick question and a quick answer if that's okay. Kia ora, Tiffany. Also from AG.
Tiffany from Auckland Transport here. Thank you for the great presentation. Just to toku what Simon said, we work together. Really interesting to hear the differences from the girls and the children. I'm wondering if there's any opportunity to maybe have different interactions for the girls. Like there is something called Bike Town, where they specifically just have bike maintenance for the girls because they feel a little bit more comfortable just kind of being on their own and sharing those experiences. So just wondering if there are any learnings that you may have picked up based on the different perspectives that you heard.
So, and on the gender-based thing, the one thing that I really picked up on was just that one aspect when working with their experience on a bike. But oh, sorry, that's not true. There is other aspects when talking more so with the teachers at Southland Girls High School. They identified things like their school uniform got in the way, or the use of the helmet and the hair, or lack of facilities at the end of the journey when they got to school. They had nowhere to put stuff or get changed. So those are definitely considerations for the different genders, I suppose. Yeah, but it's definitely worth some more time if you're going to look at context-specific adjustments for one school or one group. Yeah, then there definitely needs to be some more work done in that area.
Yeah, absolutely. Kia ora. Thank you, Tiffany. Okay, I'd really like to acknowledge Stella and Tim. Thank you for sharing your kōrero today, and thank you to all of you who have taken the time to come and listen. Ngā mihi kia koutou katoa mō tū tautoko. Thank you for participating. I'll just close us with a karakia. Pau hihiri, pau rarama, pau o te whakaaro, pau o te tangata, pau o te aroha, te pau ihiri nei ia tātou, mauri ora kia tia tātou, haumi e, hui e, tai ki e. Ngā manaakitanga, everybody. Thank you so much for coming in. Ka kite.